Previously on Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic.
I know from a friend of hers that I spoke to, said that she walked out the door, she usually walks out, passed her bike in the bike rack and walked the opposite direction of our home. He said hello, she did not respond. The next thing that we have for certain is that she was sighted in the shopping square, which is approximately a block and a half from the school.
I mean, this has been going on for 29 years almost, and it just didn't end the day that, it's been going on for 29 years. And I've been a part of this. In the beginning, behind the scenes, a little bit more in front of the scenes right now.
First couple of 4 or 5 days, you spend 24 hours a day crying your eyes out and saying, why? Why me? Why me? Why my Amy? And I guess there is no answer to that question because this is proven it can happen anywhere, anytime. But after a while, you still cry. I ask, as Amy's mother, on this, her 11th birthday, to give us the gift of that information. The best gift that can be given Amy today is her safe return to our family.
First of all, Margaret and Amy were close. They rode horses together, they hung out together, they were more close. And I think that there had to be some factual basis in Amy's mind for this trip to meet this person. And I think that would make sense. And I also think that for them to have the information they did implies some familiarity with Margaret.
A female jogger was jogging this morning at approximately 7:30, and she spotted something in the field and went off the field and checked, and it was a body.
As the sun was setting behind the Mihaljevics' Bay Village home, the family was inside, grieving, in no condition to speak. And most of the neighbors were too stunned for words.
Being kidnapped, and she's with God now, so he'll be fine.
He's sick.
Hope they just find him and arrest him.
Amy became everybody's child. Her playful grin endeared us to her, but tattered ribbons now remind us of the ugliness, not the hope.
To you. There aren't any words in the English language to explain the feeling, the emptiness, the anger, the trauma, the tragedy. There just aren't adjectives enough to explain. There's just no way.
I am Bill Huffman, and welcome to the 15th episode of Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic, a Slow Burn Media, LLC production. I'd first like to say thank you to all the listeners for their kind words about the previous episode that focused on getting to know Amy's mother, Margaret. I thought it was important to hear from her because she passed away nearly 20 years ago, and her voice can be forgotten through the course of an investigation such as this. During the past few months, we have covered Amy's bizarre abduction, the search, the discovery of her body, the investigation for her killer, and I've spoken with members of the FBI, the Bay Village Police Department, one of Amy's close friends, Nick from the True Crime Garage podcast, and true crime author James Renner. Heck, Renner and I even met with some people who had bought one of James's top suspects' old storage unit. To say this case is an enigma wrapped in a mystery may be an understatement. The answer to who killed Amy remains unanswered. For now. It is up to the public to report any information they may have on this case, or the suspect or suspects that may be involved. There has been one update since the last episode. It hasn't been fully fleshed out, but since James Renner said I could use the information he has put on his blog, then it is worth noting here. So please advise, this is straight from the site, amymihaljevic.blogspot.com, a site that James has kept for years now. So according to Renner, quote, "A couple weeks ago I was contacted by a person who moved into a rental property in Wayne County, Ohio. While cleaning inside a closet, they discovered that years ago, someone had carved a message into the wall. It reads, quote, AM was murdered here, unquote. Of course, they assumed this meant Amy Mihaljevic. Wayne County is not far from Ashland, so it suddenly became of great interest to authorities, and everyone was trying to figure out who lived there in 1989. The house itself sits at a rural crossroads in Orville and is owned by Stoll Farms. I drove down there last week, puppy in the passenger seat, and spoke to farmers with Stoll and other farms in the area who have roots going back 100 years. I was given the name of a man who they believed lived there with his wife and son in 1989. I managed to track him down to a farm in Kentucky. I spoke to his wife at length and learned a few things. First, this seems like a real, decent family, and nobody appears to have a criminal history. They have no idea who would have carved something like that in the closet and don't remember seeing it. But they recall they were not actually there in the fall of 1989. They believe a farmhand employee of Stoll Farms was living there. The woman could not remember the name. Finally, I visited the Stolls themselves. A Bay Village police officer had visited them, and they were reluctant to say much. Other than it appears nobody can 100% recall who it was who lived there. Mike Lewis at Confidential Investigations, a private eye in Cleveland, ran a background check of the address itself. Nearly 40 different people have leased the house in the last 40 years. Perhaps the name of the person who carved the message is on there, but none of the names are familiar to me. Unsettling is all I can say, and if you would like to read more on James Renner's blog, the address is amymihaljevic.blogspot.com. James has been a valuable resource throughout this podcast, and his investigative work he's done over the years is greatly appreciated by everyone who wants this killer found. In the last episode, we got to know Mark Mihaljevic on a more personal level. She had been heard throughout the podcast in sound bites, but to hear her speak from the heart was touching. On this week's episode of Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic, we are going to get to know Amy's father, Mark. Over this past summer, I made 2 trips out to Mark's home, a beautiful place off a cul-de-sac, some 20 miles or so from where he raised Amy and his son, Jason. Mark is remarried. His wife, Georgette, greeted me on both occasions and went out of her way to make me feel comfortable. Here I was talking about the worst thing that anyone could imagine happening to them, and they are concerned about how much I've had to eat and drink. But that really does sum up the Mihaljevics. They are always aware of their guests' needs, and they are very welcoming. One thing that stood out is the amount of clocks that the Mihaljevics had collected over the years. And I also make mention of the clocks because there will be at least a few occasions where you hear the sound of a clock going off. Another thing that was really fascinating was the giant dollhouse that had been built for their niece. Georgette had spent hours making each little item in the house, and they told me that it got so big that they're probably going to have to keep it and just let the niece come over and play. Georgette was very kind during my visits, and she really seems to have a great bond with Mark. Mark Mihaljevic's a large, unassuming guy who in his early 70s moves around pretty well. His face may show some of the wounds of a man who suffered with the loss of his 10-year-old daughter for nearly 30 years. But he looks good. He is thoughtful when he reflects on Amy as a child, but you can tell the pain in which he suffers is one that won't ever see an end, no matter who, if anyone, is found guilty of his daughter's murder. This case has always been personal to me because of the proximity of where Amy was abducted. But after I met Amy's father, it did take things to a whole new level. I desire nothing more at this point than to seek closure for a family that has suffered for close to 30 years. What you will hear next are excerpts from my interviews with Mark Mihaljevic over the summer of 2018. We discuss everything from Amy as a child to where he grew up in Wisconsin, his work with Buick, and what his life has been like seeking justice for his daughter. It's important for other people to hear your perspective on the case and that you're still out here and still looking for answers and you're living your life. But
as well as you can do it, you just gotta keep putting one foot ahead of the other.
Basically, I want to get a sense of what your life was like before any of this happened. Like, what was your, let's say the months leading up to October 27th, 1989. Like, what was a normal weekend like?
Well, I pretty much worked 5 days a week, and I was gone quite a bit, and in fact, the day that Amy was abducted, I was just coming back out of Cincinnati. Excuse me, just coming back out of Cincinnati and from a meeting. But pretty much 5 days a week I was gone from the house. So, and I worked. I put maybe too much effort into my job. But then on the weekends we would try to do something as a family, or go someplace or whatever. Amy was into horseback riding, and we'd go to horse shows, or we'd do something, or there was no set that on Saturday at a certain time we had to be a certain place at a certain time.
What time did you typically get home on a weeknight?
Well, if I was here in town, I'd get home at 6:30, a little bit later. If I was out of town, of course, I might be gone for 2 or 3 days.
I was interested in the different dealerships that Mark would have traveled to, so I wanted him to expand on his territory.
When I was here in town, I just really traveled within the Lake County, Geauga County, Lake County, Cuyahoga County, and Lorain County. That was it. That was my district. We had one dealer here, and he did more for Buick as far as advertisement, not singly, but with this ad group, and getting dealers involved and stuff that I don't think Buick had a clue how to do. And I'm saying that not meanly, but he did more for Buick by himself in this area.
Was he he was just progressively thinking?
He knew everybody. He knew everybody. If you wanted tickets to go see underground submarine races, he could get you tickets.
Who was this? What was his name?
His name was George Scheinman. He's since passed away.
Okay.
But he was...
George Scheinman.
He was out of Painesville, Ohio.
Okay. And he ran an advertising company?
No, he was president of the ad group.
So, president of the ad group, what is the president of the ad group?
Well, it's just like when you got 14, 15 people come together, he was the leader. He was the president. He was the... Of all the Buicks? Of the Buick people here in town, yeah.
So what was his job like on a day-to-day job?
Selling cars, satisfying people.
So that's really... So, wow.
He was a dealer. But that takes some real effort, and takes you away from your core business, because you're doing so much other stuff of... whatever it might be. Back then Buick was at one time we were this guy knew everybody. We were the official car of the Cavaliers, official car of the Indians, official car of, I'm missing somebody. We were the official car of the Grand Prix. We were official car of the Cleveland Air Show. We were the official car, you just name it, we were the official car.
When did you leave Buick then? Or when did you leave, did you retire from them?
I did retire from them. This was my last move coming to Cleveland, and not begrudgingly or not with any malice in my heart, but Amy had a lot to do with the Amy case had a lot to do with me staying here in Cleveland. With Margaret leaving and her passing, then I'm the only one left.
Can you recall what that day was like on October 27th, 1989, when you returned back from the meeting in Cincinnati?
That was a Friday, and we had a zone meeting down there in Cincinnati, and I got home here, it must have been about 6 o'clock at night, and Margaret was running around, and she's like, I said, what's the matter? I can't find Amy, and that's how it all began. Margaret had called some of our friends, and they, Amy's friends, and they searched around, and where she might be at somebody's house or something. But of course, it didn't happen that way. By then, Margaret had called all the Amy's parents' friends or friends, and called some of our friends that lived in. In fact, I was just out to lunch with this one guy that came in. He lived in Vermilion, came in from Vermilion, and that's when him and I walked the French Creek there all the way from Bay Village to the lakefront that night. And
when you're the parent of a missing child, I can only imagine the pain and heartache that must go through you the first day that you find out that your child is missing. So I wanted to talk with Mark about when it was that he thought it was time to call it a day.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if there was,
Were you up all night?
I was up all night. If I remember right, in the kitchen there, the phone was hanging on the wall in the kitchen. We didn't have, it's not like we had wireless. And Margaret camped right below that phone that night in the kitchen floor, waiting for the phone to ring. So.
Is there anything that you would have done differently that first weekend? I know it's hard to look back and reflect on that time, but is there anything that you would have changed?
I don't know. There's things I would do differently about how I handled it with Jason or whatever. And he was sort of left out in the, we asked him about what might have been going on. I don't really know, and the chief would probably know, but I don't think they really questioned Jason. They might have, a little bit, but they didn't go too in depth with him about what might have happened. Well, number one, the more I think about it, that Monday, I said, Jay, you need to go to school. I said, you might hear something that nobody else, because it definitely was a talk of Bay Village by Monday morning. And maybe I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have forced him to go to school, because he was under, even though he didn't show it, he was under stress also, and shouldn't have done that.
You have mentioned in previous interviews about the marriage that you had with Margaret. Do you think that Amy was aware of the unhappiness that existed between the two of you?
I'd like to think maybe that's what started Amy to go. The story is, I'm trying to buy a gift to make my mother happy. So I think that's maybe where it started from.
That's how he got her comfortable?
Well, that's how
Or she
just wanted to go out of her way to try to make Margaret happy.
Fishermen pulled the body out of the lake.
Do they know who it is?
Freeform's Cruel Summer is back with a new season and a new mystery.
People are gonna start asking questions. We have to get our story straight.
From executive producer Jessica Biel.
The girls are hiding something.
Nothing stays secret in this town for long.
There are two sides.
How far do I need to go to prove my loyalty to you? This whole thing was your idea!
To every secret.
I need to know what happened. And what if you don't like what you hear?
Freeform's Cruel Summer. New episodes Tuesdays. Stream on Hulu.
One of the things that I've learned in my investigation is that Amy had a secret code that she would use with her mother.
Yeah, the kids, and I think I remember the word, but if somebody said, I'm here to pick up you at school, they, without them saying the secret word, they knew that was not, they weren't supposed to be doing it. Well, back to Amy. So Amy was a can-do person, very smart. She was very book smart. Did well in school. Athletics, horses, and school, and just usually pretty quiet. If she didn't know you, she wasn't going to talk to you.
Unfortunately, Margaret also suffered from alcoholism, and it was a dividing factor within the marriage. And during Amy's disappearance, even the authorities were having issues with the drinking.
When Amy went missing, it was the end of October, but it was extremely warm, nice out. Yeah. And our house in Bay Village backed up to the railroad tracks. But in between the railroad tracks and the main yard, there was a, 25-foot buffer of woods. I mean, you could see through them and stuff, but there was a 25-foot buffer. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time, Bill, I think it was the FBI or the police, I can't remember which now. They were out in that, right on the edge of that buffer, talking to Margaret. And they came back in one of those times, and they didn't really yell at me, but they made it very forceful. Mark, you gotta stop her from drinking. We keep getting different stories from her out there. She's not giving us the same information.
Did Margaret's drinking make her a person of interest to the authorities when Amy first went missing?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Just that she was drinking so much that she couldn't stay focused.
It was impeding their investigation.
Sure, that's a good way to put it, Bill.
Needless to say, but you understood that being the parents of a missing child, that you guys were going to be put under the microscope a little bit more intensely than, say, somebody else in the family.
Oh, sure. That's the answer to most of the cases like that. It's going to be in the family.
Amy's body was found 106 days later on February 8th, 1990 on County Road 1181. And I wanted to know as gently as possible when it was that Mark thought it was that Amy wasn't going to be coming home alive. And this is what he had to say.
I had in my mind long before then that she wasn't going to be found alive. That was just probably about 2 months before. They had a birthday party for her at the old middle school in Bay. And I just realized that was the night that she wasn't coming back alive. I had held hope all that time until that night. But that's, I guess, I don't know.
Despite it being the worst day of your life, what is your memory or recollection of that February 8th, 1990?
Well, I was at a dealership, and I was called and told that they had found Amy's body, and we all met back at the house there on Linford, and the police chief at the time, Bill Garou, I don't know who from the FBI anymore, probably Dick Wren, and the second pastor in at Bay was there, and me and Margaret, and I might be missing somebody, but I think that's who was there. Once they found her body, I thought, well, now they'll be able to get some information from the body and maybe solve the case.
After Amy's body was found, did you guys have a memorial service or a funeral for Amy here in Cleveland?
No, Amy's remains were cremated, and Margaret thought that since we were from Wisconsin, we'd always be going back to her, that her ashes were buried in Wisconsin. And then when Margaret died, she was also cremated, and their ashes are in the same plot.
You mentioned there being a service held in Wisconsin. Did you attend that service as well?
I did not go.
Oh, you didn't go? Did Margaret go?
Yes. Okay. I did not go.
Now, were you and Margaret at that point?
We were pretty much at odds. I was just starting.
And then
went
exacerbated the situation?
Yeah, went crazy after that, even more crazy.
Statistically speaking, the death of a child in a marriage generally leads to a divorce. It's just that two people grieve in different manners, and Mark and Margaret already had issues before Amy went missing, and her death was just something that put the situation into full speed.
That started before the issues with Margaret and I. That was pre-issues.
Okay. And then when Amy went missing,
that really kicked into high gear.
And so that just drove you guys further and further.
Yeah, well, yeah. We got divorced finally in 1991.
1991. Now, did you separate for a while before that, or did you?
No, I always stayed in the house.
Stayed in the same house?
Yes.
And you kept Amy's room the same as it was?
Yeah, nothing ever moved back into Amy's room or anything.
After the funeral and the memorial services, and the fact that Amy had been gone for nearly 4 months, did you start to question pretty much everybody in your life as far as possible suspects?
Oh, yeah, you run through your whole list of friends. And
do you start looking at your friends differently? I mean, is there any, did you...
No.
Did it change? I guess the question is, obviously it's going to affect you psychologically, but did you become more introverted or more isolated?
It made me probably go just a little bit the other way, from being a little bit more introverted to a little bit more
gregarious.
Yeah.
Extroverted, I should
Extroverted. Yeah, it forced you to make things happen if you could.
Yeah. I mean, I know that in the video of when you guys donated, the tree was planted, you're just sort of off to the background there. And, just to see your role change through the years. And as you mentioned, Margaret's passing obviously made you have to be the main cheerleader.
Yes,
but
exactly.
The reason you haven't left Cleveland is because there isn't any. I mean, this is home now. But
this is home.
But the reason you haven't left is because of Amy.
And that was one of the reasons I was not transferred any further by General Motors, by Buick.
Did you end up retiring from Buick?
I did retire from them. This was my last move coming to Cleveland, and not begrudgingly or not with any malice in my heart, but Amy had a lot to do with the Amy case had a lot to do with me staying here in Cleveland. For being a major corporation, and Buick was a division of General, they were extremely. We had a general manager of Buick that was extremely family orientated, team orientated, well respected type of person.
Was there any point that you thought that your job may have had some involvement in Amy's abduction and murder?
And I dealt with a lot of people, and as far as customers with problems, and you never know. I might have said no to somebody that wanted something that I didn't think that person had coming, and it might have made him angry. You never know. So you don't know.
Was it impossible not to think about who could have possibly done this to your daughter?
Oh yeah, you always play that game. It could be this guy, it could be that guy. Everything from the floor refinisher down to whatever else. You always think, oh, that makes sense.
Amy's life was obviously cut tragically short. What do you think she would be doing if she were still alive today?
I don't know. She'd be out riding Don's horse.
That's for sure. You got to take advantage of what you got.
Yeah.
So was the horse that he had, was that stabled at Holly Hill?
No, he kept the horse at he had Vermilion. He had the horses right on his house.
His property?
Oh, yeah. Oh. Like I've always said, Amy was a can-do person. I mean, when she learned how to tie her shoes, if you're in a hurry to try to go someplace and try to tie her shoes, I can do that. You're not helping. I can do that. She would have been a good athlete. She would have been a good athlete. Loved her animals, whether it was the dog. My one friend in Vermilion had the her and Margaret rode horses, but she always loved animals.
So when I met with Chief Spetzel, I asked him what he would say to the killer if he knew he was listening. And I guess in this situation, I'm going to ask you the same question. What would you say to the killer if he's listening to you right now?
Hey, I don't know how Mrs. Chief would have answered it, but hopefully your time being free is coming to an end, and hopefully I'm just saying your time being free out in the public is coming to an end. That's what I'm trying to say.
This individual has taken the life of your daughter and in the meantime has lived a free life. What would you like to see done when he is arrested?
Somebody once made a statement, and it's true. It's like describing a color on the phone that nobody's ever seen before. Try to describe a color nobody's ever seen.
But as far as you're saying,
you have no idea what you're going to be like.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an unknown.
Yep. So, back when it's you want an eye for an eye when this thing, but now I just think if when they catch the person, just put them in a general prison population.
They'll take care of it.
They'll take care of it.
Now, you said you wanted an eye for an eye back then, so you were out for...
Oh, yeah, kill the son of a bitch. But not just put him in... And go a little further, maybe on the day Amy was abducted and her birthday, put him in solitary confinement for that day. Just 2 days a year, but then put him in a general prison population. Make sure they know who he... Because they don't... I mean, even when he was a body shop guy... that was associated with one of the biker clubs.
Okay.
And they were out. I mean, you don't mess with kids, even though they're druggies, bikers, and he didn't look like that. That was not the mental image that you see, but he knew them, and they were out. They were out looking.
As I mentioned before, the Mihaljevics are very welcoming people. And as we closed out our interviews, they were very aware of the fact that I had not eaten in almost 2 hours, and did try to persuade me to stay for lunch.
Yeah. Might as well stay for lunch now, Bill.
Actually, it's my wife's off of work today, so...
Well, yeah, she's not teaching anymore.
No, so I actually have to... This is my one day off this week, so...
Call her up and have her come over. We'll throw some steaks on her, so...
Maybe sometime this summer we'll do that.
That'd be fine.
So there is Mark Mihaljevic, and I hope this week's episode was able to give you a little bit more insight into the type of person that Mark is. And he is definitely one of those people that has carried this burden of the loss of his daughter for nearly 30 years. And I, like many other people, including the authorities, would like nothing more than to see closure for Mark and his family. I'm very excited to announce today that I received the trailer for the upcoming documentary series that Investigation Discovery Channel has been working on for over the past year. And one of the episodes in the 3-part documentary series will be focused solely on the Amy Mihaljevic case. I myself was a participant in the interview process, as well as James Renner and some of the other voices that you have heard on this podcast. So it is my pleasure to play for you the upcoming trailer for the documentary series, The Lake Erie Murders, that airs on Investigation Discovery at 9 p.m. Eastern to 12 a.m. Eastern on December 30th. Enjoy.
October 27th, 1989. Started out like any other day.
Everything changed. Everybody's life changed. He took my mother.
The first thing that we noticed was blood mixed with lake water.
Bring her home to us. I beg you.
I couldn't imagine going through what she went through.
The Lake Erie Murders, all new series, premieres Sunday, December 30th at 9, only on Investigation Discovery.
Thank you again for listening to this week's episode of Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic, and stay tuned next week for the final episode of the Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic series. If you enjoy this independently produced podcast, please help support independent journalism by clicking on the donate button on the bottom left of WhoKilledAmyMihaljevic.com. You can also make a donation through the Venmo app with my username at Bill-Huffman-3. Thank you to the listeners that help keep this podcast going. Any amount is appreciated. And you can also help support the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that will help get this show the coverage it deserves. You can contact the Bay Village Police Department at 440-871-1234 if you have any new information regarding this case. As well as the FBI is offering a reward of up to $25,000 for anyone with information concerning the arrest of the person responsible for the death of Amy Renee Mihaljevic. You can contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Thank you again for listening, and as always, be safe.
Hi, podcast listeners. I'm Carol Costello, a former CNN anchor and national correspondent. This January, I'm launching a podcast about one of the first cases I ever covered as a journalist. It's one that stuck with me all of these years, the one that buried itself under my skin and stayed put. It's a true crime series about an amazing woman named Phyllis Cottle who defied torture and death and brought a fierce rage to the quest to find her attacker. Carol Costello Presents Blind Rage is a production of Evergreen Podcasts and signature title of the Killer Podcast Network. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Discover more great true crime and paranormal programming at killerpodcast.com.
I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Warriors in Their Own Words, a podcast that presents the unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. As a country, we need these stories more than ever. Stories from Americans who have borne the battle, including 30-year-old remastered interviews with veterans from World War I recounting their time in the trenches of Europe, and with veterans from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and from our most recent conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other battlefields Americans may never have heard of. Hear their stories by listening to Warriors in Their Own Words wherever you find podcasts.